Well, thank you and good morning, and all these things that have been said about me, I don't know. I'm going to start off by a different kind of good morning, because I don't suppose, well, I know that this good morning's never been heard in this room before. And it's a sound which to me is very evocative of the African forest. It's the sound you would hear if you came with me to the forests in Tanzania, where I've been working, I and my team that is, for 50 years, learning about the chimpanzees. Hello. But how is it that a little girl who was born in England between the two world wars, to a family with very little money, couldn't even afford a bicycle, is, traveling around the world? I'm 300 days a year on the road, get to meet extraordinary people, get to be UN Messenger of Peace and all kinds of other things. And I think, why me and how did it happen? And I think of a story that my mother used to tell, a fable actually, many of you may know it, about the birds coming together to have a competition to see who can fly the highest. And the mighty eagle, with his great strong wings, is sure that he will win. And he goes higher and higher, and gradually the other birds drift down towards the ground. And finally, even the eagle can go no higher. But that's all right, because there he is, as he knew, up above the others. Except that hiding in the feathers on his back is a little Jenny Wren, and now she flies up and flies highest of all. And the reason I love this story is because if we think of our life as an effort to always go a little bit higher, a little bit further, and reach a goal just a little bit above our grasp, how high can any of us go without our eagle? And I look back over my life and I think of all the amazing people who've helped me on my journey. And everywhere I go, there are friends, there are Jane Goodall Institute board members and staff and volunteers. And the person I most want to acknowledge, though, is my mother. Acknowledge the wise way she raised me. Acknowledge the way that she supported what at that time was a crazy passion to grow up and go to Africa and live with animals and write books about them. And where everybody else would laugh and say, Jane, you can't get there, you don't have any money, Africa was still the dark continent, World War II was raging, and above all, I was a girl, and girls simply didn't do that sort of thing back then. But she would say, if you really want something, you work hard, you take advantage of opportunity, and you never give up, you will find a way. So obviously I did, and I won't go into that now because we haven't got time, but I got to Africa, having saved up money working as a waitress. And I heard about the late Louis Leakey, the paleontologist, anthropologist. And somebody said, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Louis. So I went and met him at the Natural History Museum. And I remember him asking me many, many questions. And because I'd done what my mother suggested and gone on learning about animals in Africa, I could answer many of them. And so he gave me a job, basically as his secretary. I hadn't been to college at that time, because we couldn't afford it. And that led to this extraordinary opportunity to go and live with and study not just any animal, but the one most like us. The chimpanzee, the DNA of humans and chimpanzees differs in structure by only just over 1%. The brain is almost identical, except that ours is bigger. We share composition of blood and immune system. And because of the similarities in the brain, it shouldn't surprise us that chimpanzees are capable of intellectual performances that we used to think unique to ourselves. And there isn't time to go into all of that, but anyone who's interested, it's been written about and proven time and time again. When I first got to Gombe, the chimps ran away. They're very conservative. They'd never seen a white ape before, and that's what we are. So I was getting more and more worried that the 6 months' money that Louis Leakey had managed to obtain for me would run out before I saw something really exciting. And thank goodness for that one day when the one chimpanzee, whom I'd named David Greybeard because of his white beard, who had begun to lose his fear before the others, I was going through the vegetation. It had been raining, I was a bit cold, and I saw a chimpanzee shape crouched over the soil of a termite mound. And I was crouching down using my binoculars, and I saw a black hand reach out and pick a stem, push it down into the termite mound, wait for a moment, pull it out, and pick off the termites with his lips. And I saw him reach out and break off a leafy twig and strip off the leaves. That is making a tool. And the reason that this was so exciting back then and led to the National Geographic coming in to provide money for the study to continue was because at that time we were defined as man the tool maker. And this is where that little saying comes from. Because when I told Louis Leakey, he said, now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans. And since that time, back in 1960, we've been finding out more and more about how chimpanzee behavior resembles our own. And if there was time, I could tell you such amazing stories, but we don't have that time now, unfortunately. And I have to move on to say that the chimpanzees have taught us, above all, that there is no sharp line dividing us from the rest of the animal kingdom. It's a very blurry line. They teach us that we are not the only beings on this planet with personalities, minds, and above all, emotions and feelings. And that we're not the only beings who can feel happiness, sadness, fear, despair, pain, and so forth. And this gives us a new respect, not only for the chimpanzees, but the other amazing animals with whom we share this planet. Closer to you, here in Singapore, is the Asian ape, the orangutan. And we now know that all of the great apes, that's including the gorilla and the little bonobo, and the gibbons, and so many other amazing animals around this planet are in danger of extinction. That's why I left the forest. When I suddenly realized in the early 80s that chimpanzees right across their range were disappearing as forests were cleared for cultivation or for human habitation, as human populations grew, as we saw the beginning of the bushmeat trade, which is the commercial hunting of wild animals for food, which goes on all over the world. But I was particularly concerned about the onslaught of the animals of the African rainforest, where the Congo Basin, the last stronghold for many of these extraordinary creatures, was being opened up by foreign logging companies going in, making roads along which the hunters could catch rides with the logging trucks, shoot everything on site, dry it or smoke it, and then the trucks were giving it a lift back to the towns, where the urban elite would pay more for it than they would for chicken or goat, because they said it was their culture. And so this was what caused me to leave Gombe and start traveling around in Africa to talk to people about what was going on. And of course, as I was doing that, I was learning all the time more and more about the problems facing Africa, the deforestation leading to soil erosion, leading to desertification, the gradual shrinking of fresh water supplies, the increasing droughts, the worse floods, the crippling poverty, the disease, the ethnic violence, and realizing then how much of that had been caused and was still being caused by the leftover remnants of colonialism, and today the onslaught of many multinationals. And I realized at the same time that this sort of thing was going on in the developing world, all over the developing world, and that this was not something happening far away from England, where I grew up, or from the US, where I was getting most of my money from. It was affecting us deeply, because as we all know in this room, as the great tropical forests, the lungs of the world they've been called, as they are, this sounds very weird to me, but as they were disappearing, so world climate was changing. And you all know about the controversy about climate change and global warming. But I think most people today understand that the destruction of the forest, the release of greenhouse gases, the CO2, the methane that has been exacerbated by intensive farming all over the world as more and more people want more and more meat. And so I was learning also about the unsustainable lifestyle of so much of the developing world. So on the one hand, you have the crippling poverty, and on the other hand, yes, because this is horrible. It's echoing like crazy. So, okay, is that better? Good. Thank you. It was very putting off, and I'm sorry. So, oops. So. Get it right. So, where am I? Okay, so we're unsustainable. So I realized that I needed to travel and talk about these problems more and more in Europe, in North America, and then increasingly in Asia. Because we're all interconnected. If there's one thing I've learned during my 50 years since I began the research at Gombe, it's the interconnectedness of life. It's the interconnectedness of the various life forms, fauna and flora, that make up an ecosystem, and how that is also interconnected with our lives today. The second reason for my leaving Gombe was that I suddenly realized that all around the national park, which is very tiny, the trees, it was not just some deforestation, it was virtually total deforestation. I flew over in a small plane. The national park's only 30 square miles, and looking down, I could see that all around the national park, the hills that had once been forested when I arrived in 1960 were bare. All the way along the edge of Lake Tanganyika, climb up the hills, look out away from the lake, everywhere the trees had gone. There were clearly more people living there than the land could support, and they were struggling to survive. And so the question came, how can we even try to save these precious chimpanzees if the people living around their home are in such dire straits? And that led to our program, the Jane Goodall Institute program, Take Care. Take Care began with 12 villages with a small grant from the European Union, and it was designed from the start to be a very holistic program, improving the lives of the villagers in as many ways as we could, but not sweeping in as a bunch of arrogant white people and saying, well, we know you're struggling and these are the things we've decided to do to make your life better, but rather a team of Tanzanians going in and listening in the traditional African way to the elders, to some of the elder women as well, and asking them what they thought would make their lives better. And we started where they wanted, which was to grow more food, to have better health facilities, and better education for their children. And then we were able to introduce other programs such as better water supplies, protecting the watershed, reforesting these steep valleys so that the streams were no longer getting silted up every time it rained, and it rains a lot there. And perhaps the most significant of all our programs was microcredit opportunities for women. It was based on the Grameen Bank system, or rather I should say it is based on 5 women with an opportunity for 2 men to join the group. They usually don't. I don't think they like being outnumbered, but there are some. And we found that this program, which is now in 9 villages out of a total of 32 of the original Take Care model, and these 9 centers serve all of these 32 villages. And there's a payback of over 90% from these women. And the only loans, the only projects for which they are allowed to take out loans are those which are deemed to be environmentally sustainable. And so gradually we see the improvement, the empowerment of the women. And because we know that all around the world, as women's education improves, family size tends to drop, we provide scholarships, as many as we can, to keep girls in school, because of course boys are always given preference in poor families. And so this program has been really successful. We also provide family planning information, because it would be totally irresponsible to help them grow more food, to have better health, to keep more babies alive, if we weren't addressing the situation which led to the problem in the first place. Every single village that the team went to said, "Why didn't you come before?" There is a change in culture and awareness in these remote villages. So we're now in 42 villages, and the program is so successful that it's replicated in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Congo-Brazzaville, as the old French Congo, in Uganda, in Gabon, and it's starting in other African countries as well. It can be adapted to anywhere in the world. And right now, we're speaking with the World Bank, with the Gates Foundation, with the European Union, and the German embassy in Tanzania about scaling this program up across Africa, because it works, because we have changed the lives of the people. Of course, as I'm traveling, talking about all of these things, including the success of the Take Care model, I'm learning also about all the problems that have been inflicted on the developing world by the developed world. We seem to export sometimes our very worst practices. And of course, we're exporting chemicals that cause pollution. We're polluting the air, the water, and the land of our own countries all around the world. We see a huge increase in some certain kinds of disease. We won't go into that, but you all know, I suspect, what they are. And so let me come back to a question that really is puzzling. I could talk for a long time about the similarities in the behavior of chimpanzees and humans. The main difference, I think,